Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to be in front of this very popular committee. I'd like to introduce bill number RS 08 or 21 RS 0877. Yeah, it's a bill dealing with the ability for a licensee to put emergency contact information on their driver's license as well as their vehicle registration.
Are there any questions? Hearing none, are there any objections? Hearing no objections, it is introduced. Thank you, Representative.
Thank you.
Next, I'd recognize Representative Adam Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the second Smith to come before the committee today already. I'd like to introduce or request RS 0880. It is a bill that will create a new exemption for municipal motor grader operators not requiring a CDL license.
Are there questions? Are there any objections? Hearing no objections, it's introduced. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Priel and other members of the House Transportation Committee, I come to you today as a proponent of House Bill 2107. Many funerals include a procession from the church or chapel to the final resting place, and House Bill 2107 provides for the right-of-way for such a
Representative Collins, I thought you had a bill introduction.
No, I'm
Okay,
testifying on.
I'll call you a little later. It's my apologies. I got out of order.
Thank you.
Representative Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for recognizing me. I have a bill introduction. I'd like to introduce RS 0828. This bill essentially, when it comes to tow lots and tow drivers, it's like the wild, wild west. There's no regulation. So I would like to introduce this.
Okay. Are there questions? Seeing none, are there objections? Hearing no objections, it's introduced. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Finney.
I'd like to introduce RS number 21 RS 0808. And what this bill does in regards to suspended driver's licenses, when you apply for a restricted license, there's an application fee of $25. And what this bill does, it eliminates the $25. And then also in this bill, the second thing that it does is after you've paid all your suspended driver's license fees, or even at the end of the restricted driver's license fee, there's a 90-day penalty waiting period. And so this eliminates this. And you may recall this bill was actually worked in this committee last year on House Bill 2547. We passed it 125 to 0 on the floor. And then when Senate Bill 275 came over here, it passed 0 to 39 in the Senate. And this committee admitted, combined those bills with the amendment by Senator Pittman here. So this is a reintroduction of a bill that we had cleared in both houses, but it didn't make it to the floor because of COVID.
Questions? Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Finney, for bringing this here today. Very important issue that we need to address. Are there any changes from this year in the language?
This is identical.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Are there any questions? Any other questions? Hearing none, are there any objections? Hearing no objections, it's introduced. Thank you,
Thank you,
Finney.
Mr. Chair.
Representative Helgerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a bill relating to creating a vulnerable road user. Number is RS 0896.
Are there questions? Hearing none, is there objection? Hearing no objection, it is introduced. Are there other bill introductions that I haven't got on my list? Seeing none, we'll open the hearing on House Bill 2107, which is regulating funeral processions. Would Revisor Wagner please give us an update?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope everyone can hear me all right. This is Chris Wagner from the Revisor's Office. HB 2107 provides for the regulation of funeral processions through state law and creates a new traffic infraction for vehicles that do not properly yield to those processions. Section 1 creates 3 new definitions for funeral procession, funeral lead vehicle, and funeral escort. Under current law, funeral lead vehicles are already allowed to be equipped with certain flashing headlamps when serving as a funeral lead vehicle. So that's just a note for the committee. Section 2 actually creates the new violation in subsection A. And the violation states that a pedestrian or vehicle shall yield the right of way to funeral processions when that procession is being led by a lead vehicle or accompanied by an escort. The violation is coupled with a new penalty that will be put in the uniform fine schedule under the Uniform Traffic Act. That violation is a $20 fee. Subsection B goes on to allow funeral processions to go through intersections when the funeral lead vehicle proceeds first. And that's regardless of any traffic control devices or right-of-way provisions that may exist under state law or local law. Finally, subsection C puts some limits on the funeral procession right-of-way leeway. Those limits include that the procession must yield to any authorized emergency vehicle with lights or sirens on. The procession must yield when instructed by law enforcement. They must exercise due care to avoid collisions according to a current state law. And then they also must stay within 300 feet of the next car in the procession to be able to proceed through an intersection. So section 3 goes on to require processions to follow closely to other vehicles in a procession as is practical and safe. This is in accordance with a current state law that that doesn't allow following too closely. I guess in accordance with that law, funeral processions are already allowed to disregard that law. So this is just reiterating that statute applies. And then the section 3 also requires that the procession vehicles display lighted headlamps or taillights or flashing hazard lights if so equipped. And then finally in section 4, these new provisions would not prohibit cities and counties from requiring certain notification to law enforcement before going through with the funeral procession. And it also doesn't prohibit any further city or county regulation that is not in conflict with these new provisions. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chris, for that. This is similar to legislation we had last year or 2 years ago. Is it identical?
It is identical to the bill from last session, yes.
You know what the fate of that bill was? Did we pass it out of the whole house? I think we passed it out of committee.
It was passed out of committee, but it was never, I don't know, either due to time constraints or whatever, it did not
Didn't go
get
above the
voted
line.
on the House.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Francis.
That was my question.
Representative Del Perdang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mine is more of a concern, and I think you've probably hit on it. There's probably no changing it, but I'm looking at the $20 fine, apparently as per some on the uniform code. But to me, that seems awful low for what we're getting into here. Is that set in stone? Can it possibly be altered at all?
It can definitely be amended, however the committee decides to proceed. But yeah, it's amendable.
Did you know on that 20, are court cost also incurred?
Yes, they would be. Just I guess
approximate, and I know it's going to vary, but
yeah, no, I don't have those exact numbers, but court costs would apply.
Thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Wagner. First proponent I have listed is Representative Ken Collins. Ken, you have the floor, and my apologies for getting you up there earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chairman Prill and other members of the House Transportation Committee, I come to you today as a proponent of House Bill 2107. Many funerals include a procession from the church or chapel to the final resting place, and House Bill 2107 provides for the right-of-way for such a formation while traveling through the normal traffic on public roadways. In addition to the hearse, limousines, and cars, in recent times, motorcycles from the Patriot Guard, American Legion Riders, and other organizations accompany the caravan. House Bill 2107 provides for the right-of-way for funeral processions on the public roadways in the state of Kansas. It is important that this right-of-way be provided to ensure the safety of the drivers, riders, and passengers of the participating vehicles. Thank you again.
Other questions for Representative Collins? See, there's a question in the back, Representative Howe.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Collins, is there some background information you could provide to the committee about the 300 feet regarding the procession, if there's an interruption in that?
Well, like was mentioned by the reviser, this is identical to a bill that was presented last year. And just my personal opinion is, you know, there are going to be stragglers, and you have to have a reasonable distance where, hey, say 300 feet. If you're going through a traffic light and the light turns red, by that time, there'll be other vehicles in the intersection, and it just wouldn't be reasonable to expect the rest of the procession to be able to go through that. There wouldn't be any lead vehicles, any escort, anything like that at that point.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Proctor, I'm sorry, Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Representative Collins, for bringing this today. I was planning on having one of our Patriot Guard riders, Ronald Worley, come testify about this, because our Patriot Guards, this is a big issue for them, but they're actually laying to rest one of their own, Johnny Delariva, today. So since he's not here, could you just talk briefly about kind of what, you know, Patriot Guard and other organizations do in relation to the funerals and kind of the frequency that they're doing this, how often this occurs?
Well, to my knowledge, they're doing it quite often. They provide an escort to the fallen person, and the Patriot Guard are made up mostly of veterans and some other patriotic, interested people. And they have been known, like say if there's some controversy about the tragedy, and say there are protesters around or what have you, they help to shield the protesters from the grieving families. I know there was an instance, a young man, a town I once lived in, a young man was killed in Iraq, and there were protesters at that funeral protesting the war. And I know the Patriot Guard did a great job of just being there, just helping out the family, encouraging the family. And it really meant a lot to them, I know.
Any further questions? See none, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Pittman, or Senator Pittman, I'm sorry. I'm so used to having you sit right over here and asking a lot of questions.
Asking too many questions, Mr. Chair?
No, I didn't say that.
I heard that. Thank you, committee, for allowing me to testify today. And I really want to appreciate Representative Collins bringing this forward. You know, the source, as Representative Proctor had mentioned, in Leavenworth, Lansing, we have 2 national cemeteries, and we're very proud of those cemeteries. A lot of our soldiers come home to rest there for their interment. And it's an important issue for us there. We have Patriot Guards, we have VFW riders, we have other folks that are procession, they guide the processions, they help out. And a lot of times the police officers aren't available, or sometimes they're just busy. You can request them to, do funeral escorts, but it's not always a possibility. So I myself became aware of this when my uncle was actually buried at a national cemetery in Tennessee. And when you go through one of these processions, as we've all been through one, and you have somebody looking out for you on these roadways and stopping the traffic and making sure the families and all the procession stays together and protect basically the interests of these grieving families, as Representative Collins had mentioned, it really means a big deal. It's a big, big deal. And we need to do more here to protect those individuals who are protecting our grievers here in Kansas. I came back and realized after doing some research, we don't even recognize what a funeral procession is. We commonly think that they're allowed to go through traffic lights and things like that, but technically there's no recognition of what a funeral procession is, unlike in other states. And so I thought we could correct that. We could correct that when we work this bill and pass it out favorably and help protect our Patriot Guards, our VFW riders, our funeral directors. I will say we're going to introduce this into the Senate as well. There's one change that we're going with versus the one that's in this bill. We're taking out the provision that we actually give a traffic violation for those who don't pull over and give the funeral procession a right of way. And the reason that is I've heard a little bit of resistance from some leadership individuals who said they had a problem with that provision. And so in order to maybe get this passed, we might need to do that. That's for this committee, obviously, to decide, but that's what we're going to try and push for, at least in the Senate side, is to take the violation out when cars don't pull over, but still allow there to be a definition of a funeral procession, allow there to be escorts that are recognized to be able to do some of the traffic coordination, to allow municipalities and counties to override any kind of provisions in this if they see fit. And I know that's very important to the Johnson County folks, the different city municipalities down there said that was important to them. I do hope you guys can support this. It did pass out unanimously last year. We had some fantastic testimony from those folks that are out there doing this, and they expressed the danger they often feel as motorists go by and whiz by. A lot of younger drivers, they say, just aren't taught the same protocols of what to do in a funeral processions when they come along. And so I hope this would help us continue that tradition that's so important for our grieving families here in Kansas.
Representative Cywert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for testifying. I think it's a good bill. My question is, if you take out even if it's just a $5 warning, how are you going to enforce it, or how are you going to make anybody want to do it, because there's no penalty for it? You know, I agree, because I was in a funeral procession and somebody was nailed on an intersection because somebody didn't stop and nailed a Patriot rider in Wichita. And I have a problem with that, because unless we make it forced to be taught in our public education system, which obviously it isn't because people doesn't respect that, if we take the penalty phase out of it, how do you get anybody to pay attention? Just asking for a friend.
Yeah.
Right, Travis?
Yes, Representative, I understand that. That's why we originally had this introduced. That's what I was thinking. But even if without that, we would be recognizing the escort's ability to do the things that they do, and for insurance purposes and these types of things, we know that they wouldn't get a ticket. We know that they could be insured for this, and we would be at least establishing a foundation for further. But I'm actually very supportive of providing fines as well. So, you know, as you see fit.
Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going on the same lines, because we debated this at length last year and everything. I don't know if, obviously I can't tell you not to do that, but would you be in favor of a warning or something? Because with all of our bills, even when we introduce them, we try to educate people about what this bill is for and why we're having this bill. And last year when we talked about it, it was right before I had a forum and I brought it up. And I mean, we had over 100 people in attendance that day. And I mean, I won't say everybody was in favor of it, but overwhelmingly they were in favor. And it was like they were appalled that someone would not recognize all the lights on, and that it's not like you mistaken it for not happening. They knew it was. And yet a person cut right in front, and cars slammed the brakes, and people were talking about what it was, and they went on. Well, to me, that's not just rude. That's really sad that you don't have respect for someone who has passed. It seems like you have to do, it's unfortunate you have to do something for some people, because the majority of people will do the right thing. So I'm in favor of, like, I think what Representative Syverwood is saying, that if it takes that for people to learn how to be considerate and not so selfish, then maybe that's something we have to do.
I agree with him, Representative Ballard. I think setting the teeth in there sets the standard and sets what we Kansas will value and what we expect from our motorists out there.
Well, thank you, and I'll have to say this. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you,
I
ma'am.
served with him in the House. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Senator, for being here. It's good to call you that, I guess.
Yes, sir.
I don't know if I've got so much, I've got a question on the bill. I've got some comments I'd like to make. First off, the concern I've got on the bill is on page 1, line 20, it talks about agencies and groups designated to escort military funeral processions. Okay. In response to Mr. Proctor's comments earlier, I've been a Patriot Guard since 2009. My first ride was for, excuse me, is for Brian Etheridge, who was a Sedgwick County deputy gunned down on September 28th, 2009 in the line of duty. So that I guess my comments get into the Patriot Guard rides for escorts of military, yes. They also ride for first line individuals. I was recently, well, it was a couple of years ago, Robert Coonsey, who was shot while investigating a suspicious car incident on Sunday, September 16, 2018. I'm sorry. But the bill, I guess, there, to answer your question, there are actually a couple of Patriot Guard rider organizations. There's the Patriot Guard Riders of Kansas. There's the Patriot Guard, which is typically out of Mulvane, South Central Kansas. They've got almost kind of different duties. The one on the southern part of the state is specifically to individuals who were killed in the line of duty. And I had a real problem. We had the one a couple of years ago was a helicopter pilot from Nepal, I believe it was. Anyway, the helicopter went down. He was not in an active war zone, so the Patriot Guard down south refused to ride for his funeral. I had a big problem with that. I jumped in with some of the others and did it anyway. So there is a couple of them, but I will be probably bringing an amendment to change military to military and first responders with permission of you guys that are involved with this. I guess that was my main comments. So I've definitely will be supporting it. I'd be happy to carry this dumb thing, but it's something that needs to be done. I too have been in too many of these things where people don't respect the rules of the road. You come up and you got a funeral procession, and by golly, they got to get to their soccer game or something, and they pull right on in there. And it just gets so dangerous so fast. So thank you guys for bringing it.
Representative Doppelgain, thanks for your writing with the Patriot Guard. And I think that's a fantastic addition. You know, sometimes in Leavenworth, we focus a lot on the military. Maybe we got blinders on and we didn't really think through all the different aspects, but I think that's fantastic to protect our, you know, to cover the first responders, police officers, corrections officers.
Are there further questions? Seeing none. Senator Pittman, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next proponent I have listed is Pam Scott, Executive Director of the Kansas Funeral Directors Association. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I am Pam Scott, Executive Director of the Kansas Funeral Directors Association, and we do support this bill wholeheartedly. Through history, people have shown respect for funeral processions by honoring and showing courtesy to the funeral processions. But while society nowadays is a lot more hectic and rushed and patient, we still, again, see a lot of people that do honor the dead and provide the families with a peaceful, uninterrupted, reflective trip to the cemetery. But, you know, it also serves a purpose of assuring that out-of-town mourners can find their way to the cemeteries, which is difficult in some of the larger cities. But one of the problems is that Kansas has no comprehensive law on funeral processions. And the rules are set on a county-by-county, city-by-city basis, if they exist at all in a lot of communities. So there's no consistency. This creates confusion when funeral processions travel through maybe a number of different cities on their way to the cemetery. And it's especially in the Johnson County area, it's hard to determine where one city ends and the next begins. So we have had some funeral processions pulled over in one community on their way to the National Cemetery in Leavenworth. It's just, I don't know when I'm going from one city to the next when I'm in that area. So it is unclear. Funeral processions are important, especially for the military and law enforcement, first responders, but just your general family who has lost someone to have an escort to the cemetery is important. So we think a statewide funeral procession law would improve the safety of funeral processions by setting forth clear rules. And this would allow the public to be better educated on what the laws are concerning funeral processions. With the statewide law in effect, information could be put in the Kansas Driver's License Handbook that explains what the rules are, because I know there's a lot of people that really don't even know what the rules are. There are no rules in a lot of places, but where there are, they don't know what they are. They don't know what they're supposed to do. So if something is in the driver's license, the state of Kansas driver's license handbook, they can be educated on that and know what the rules of the road are. We have offered a couple, I have provided you with a couple of amendments that we would propose. One would be allowing a funeral, non-law enforcement funeral lead vehicle to be equipped with at least one rotating or oscillating lamp exhibiting amber or purple lights. And that's something that's kind of standard across the country in a lot of funeral procession laws. And the other has to do with limiting a funeral director's liability if they conduct a funeral procession according to this law. And this isn't for their own negligence. This is if someone in the funeral procession does not follow the law. If someone else is negligent, we don't feel like the funeral director, funeral home should be liable for someone else's actions there. For their own actions, yes, but not for someone else's actions in regard to this. So we would suggest I have a markup there with some language. So I thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. We hope that you will help us continue the practice of honoring the dead through funeral processions. I'd be available for any questions.
Other questions for Ms. Scott? You must have done a great job. I don't see any. Thank you. Committee, I would bring your attention, we have written testimony and support by Ed Klump of the Kansas Association's Chiefs of Police, Kansas Sheriff's Association, and Kansas Peace Officers Association. Also written testimony in support by Wendy Stark, League of Municipalities. Does anyone else wish to speak as a proponent on House Bill 2107? Seeing none, I have no opponents and no neutral listed. Does anyone wish to speak as an opponent? Seeing none, do I have anyone that wishes to speak as neutral? Seeing none, we will close the hearing on House Bill 2107. Committee, I'd like to take up final action on House Bill 2007, updating motor carrier laws and regulations. Supervisor Wagner, would you give us a briefing, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris Wagner from the Revisor's Office. House Bill 2007, I heard last week, provides comprehensive changes to KCC motor carrier laws and their regulation of motor carriers. There are various changes throughout the bill, mainly dealing with outdated provisions or areas of law that have been preempted by federal law. Some of the more substantive changes have to do with the motor carrier public certificate of convenience and necessity or certificate of public service. Under old law, the KCC was required to give an admin hearing whenever anyone applied for one of those certificates. Under this new provision, under this bill, that admin hearing would not be required, but would be available in accordance with the Kansas Administrative Procedure Act when a motor carrier would be denied a certificate. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for the revisor? Seeing none. Committee, what is your pleasure? Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to move House Bill 2007, please.
Second by Representative Hoheisel. Is there discussion? Hearing none. Representative Delperdang, you may close.
I close.
You've heard the motion by Representative Delperdang to pass House Bill 2007 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Now I'd like to move on to House Bill 2014, permitting military surplus vehicles to register with the Division of Vehicles for road use. Revisor Wagner, would you brief us on it, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Chris Wagner from the Revisor's Office again. House Bill 2014 would allow a person to register a military surplus vehicle with the Division of Vehicles for road use. New definition for military surplus vehicle would mean any vehicle that has 3 axles or fewer, meets the legal size and weight limits established in KSA 8-1902, 1904, 1908, and 1909. And the vehicle is less than 35 years old, was manufactured for use in the U.S. military or any other country's military with similar vehicle standards, and then later offered for sale to civilians, and it does not include fully tracked vehicles. They'll be treated similarly to special interest vehicles, except for the fact that these vehicles will be able to haul material weighing more than 500 pounds. The registration is valid for 1 year, renewed annually for $26, and there's a one-time $20 license plate fee. They are also, these vehicles are required to go through a VIN inspection by the Kansas Highway Patrol. And I'd answer any questions that he has.
Are there questions for the revisor? Seeing none. Thank you, Chris. Representative Delperdang.
I would like to move House Bill 2014, please.
Second by Representative Hoheisel. Is there discussion? Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mike.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a couple of questions that we didn't get to really cover the other day when we heard it, but it'll come out in what I'm going to cover here. But this bill includes, let me see if I can find where it says is military surplus vehicles. It does not include fully tracked vehicles, but it includes just a whole host. from the United States military forces or any other country's military forces. Now, I know in background talks on this, it's supposed to be for the Humvees and to make certain vehicles legal to be, you know, reconditioned and so forth to be able to put on the roads, and I'm 100% for that. But I went out and did a little search on the internet, and I was looking for, per this bill, it covers vehicles 3 axles or less, not fully tracked. So I went out and did a search for vehicles of 3 axles or less, not fully tracked, but I did include the term half-track, which some of you in here may know. And I came back with a list of 1,720 vehicles from around the world that would definitely qualify within the bill how it's written. And I don't know if we want to get into running half-track vehicles down the turnpike. I just don't know if that was the extent of the bill. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I do have an amendment.
Okay. Revisor Wagner, do you have that so you can send it out? The representative also has paper copies that he's going to pass out, but can you brief us on that and then pass it on so it can be sent out online too?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I did email Betty right now, and I am going to share my screen with the committee. So I hope people can see that maybe a little bit. If you'd like me to go and explain, I can do that now.
Yes, you may proceed with an explanation if you care to.
Yes. So what this amendment would do is strike where it says any other country's military forces with substantially similar vehicle standards. Instead, with some new organization, say was manufactured for use in either the United States military forces or any country that was a member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, as I'm sure most of you are aware, at the time the vehicle was manufactured. And then the other change is that at the end of that definition there in lines 14 and 15, it would say that except that a military surplus vehicle does not include a tracked vehicle.
Representative Hoheisel, do you have a question?
I have a question for the maker of the amendment.
Okay.
Is this the appropriate time?
That'll be fine now. Does anybody have any questions for the reviser first? Representative Proctor, did you have one for the reviser? Okay. Representative Hoheisel, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Vice Chairman Delberding, if you could go in a little bit of detail about the NATO portion.
The NATO, the reason we use that is I think they're manufactured a little bit more cohesive with the North American standards, but there is also a bill on the Senate side that uses this identical language. So we put it identical to what's going on there, where these two bills will come together.
Do you know, I know you referenced a couple minutes ago of 1,700, how many, what was the number?
1,720 vehicles.
1,720. Do you know how many vehicles this narrows it down to? With this amendment, how many it would narrow it down to?
No, I do not. There was a bunch on here from various, United Kingdom and the Cold Wars, and the Russian vehicles were included. And
well, we certainly don't want Russian vehicles.
There was just a whole bunch, but you're welcome to see this list. I mean,
I was just curious about the NATO language. Thank you. Thank you.
No, if I could answer that, I do have a concern. I do not want to change the original intent of this bill. That's not what I'm wanting to do, because and if somebody is saying, hey, it's going to affect what it was originally intended for, I want to know.
Okay.
So.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Proctor.
I would be interested for you to elaborate just a little bit on why in the other chamber it has been altered, because I mean, in my town, there's a number of collectors that have World War II era German vehicles, and those things are put together very, very well. probably better than a lot of the American equipment of the era, unfortunately. But, you know, they didn't produce as many, but they really produced them. And so I'm just curious, kind of what was their logic? Was it about the quality of the vehicle or something else?
Representative Delperdang.
And if the reviser's on here, you might be able to help a little bit more with that too. But it was the conversation of more falling in line with the standards of the North American type laws is the way I was understanding it. And I'd love to hear if he has any comments on it too. But it was the way the Senate side brought the bill up.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question for me, please?
Oh, question is why did we put the NATO language in here, and how does that change the standards of the vehicles? Is that fair?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure on all NATO vehicle standards, but I would say that there are many standardization agreements between these 30 countries in NATO, and they, you know, have certain standards, including standards specifically tied to military vehicles. So I think maybe the intent is to have more standardization, as I was saying.
Does that kind of answer it?
Well, I mean, I guess I'm probably in opposition to this just because, like I said, I have some constituents that are military collectors because I got a large veteran community, and the vehicles that they're driving around were from a NATO country before it was a NATO country, and they're perfectly safe. They're probably safer than a lot of the Jeeps of the era. So, but I will, you know, I'll vote that.
Okay.
Representative Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may, Representative, would just striking that language of striking page 1 or line 1 or 11, 12, are you just really looking to strike fully tracked or half track?
Okay, where it says it does not include fully tracked vehicles in there.
I guess if I may.
Sale of civilian, except that military vehicle does not include fully tracked. So obviously, we didn't want fully tracked tanks running around the streets. My concern was if you got a half-track vehicle, and if you look at most of them, it's typically 3 axles on there, so they qualified. But you know, there are some options. You could take a track vehicle and put rubber tracks on it where it would not damage the streets. But the concern was if you get out there with a regular half-track vehicle, what kind of damage are you going to do to the roads?
Correct. I guess I didn't ask my question very well. If we just had take the fully track or the half-track language out, would you be all right with that instead of just narrowing it down to NATO vehicles only?
I mean, I could compromise. What we are going to have that wording in on the Senate side, though, to be aware. So it's going to come at us either way.
Conference committee.
When I went down, my concern was the half tracks, but then we decided let's just match it up with what the Senate bill is also going to say. That was really the motive behind it.
Okay. Well, thank you, sir.
Representative Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to point out a couple of things. In Representative Williams' testimony, I think she was the maker of the bill, she states that a requested amendment by Senator Peterson would be to include NATO manufactured vehicles as those included within HB 2014, and that she has no objection to that amendment. One of the comments about World War II era vehicles, the actual language of the bill limits it to vehicles less than 35 years old. Now, I'm kind of shooting from the hip on this one, so I apologize this, but it seems like maybe when we heard it last year, or I don't know if it was testimony this year, but one of the reasons they settled on the 35 years, I thought, on these vehicles was U.S. military vehicles made in that time period, if I remember right, met some type of manufacturing standard that lessened the angst for some of the opponents when it first started out. So with that being said, I totally understand bill changes. Again, I don't think the original presenter, Representative Williams, has issue with those, so I'll be supporting this amendment.
Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Where exactly along in the Senate process are they? Is the bill kicked out of committee and on the Senate floor? Have they've already put that amendment on in the Senate?
That'd be a question for the Senate. I could not answer that.
Mr. Chairman, if you wouldn't mind, I can answer that. Chris Wagner from the Revisor's Office. Thank you. The Senate, that was the original language they had in their bill. And I am pulling it up.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, Chris, they had both the NATO language and striking the Foley in their version.
Not striking the fully tracked vehicle, but they did have the NATO language, and that matches the Senate bill. Just to give a status, that bill has been heard so far last week. But
Yeah, if I have no qualms on striking Foley, and if Representative Williams, who I believe was the maker of the bill, is fine with the language of NATO, and the good Senate committee over there is fine with it as well, I'll be supporting this. Thank you.
Is there further discussion on the amendment? Representative Ballard.
Just a clarification now, that I just want to make sure, did you say the Representative Williams had fully or not in it? She didn't address that. So she didn't address it. Okay, just did NATO.
Representative Jacobs, you have, no? Okay. I just saw that perplexed look on your face like you had a question. Are there further questions? Representative Delperdang, you may close.
With that, I close and.
No, you need to make a motion on your amendment.
Yeah, I move my amendment.
Okay, is there a second? Second by Representative Hoheisel. Now, is there any discussion, additional discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, now you may close.
Okay, I was a little out of order, sorry about that. I think we've covered everything that it's after, and like I said, my intent is not to alter the original intent from Representative Williams on this bill. So if it does and we find that out, then maybe I'll take it up on the House floor, but that was not the intent of it. So with that, I close.
You've heard the motion by Representative Delperdang to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. We're back on the bill as amended. We had a motion, I believe, by Representative Delperdang to pass the, I need you to make a new motion on that because it's been amended.
So I motion to move the bill, or House Bill 2014 as amended.
Seconded by Representative Hoheisel. Is there discussion? Hearing none, you may close.
I close.
You've heard the motion by Representative Delperdang to pass House Bill 2014 as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. This concludes our business for the day. I do have an announcement, though, on this. Our next meeting will be, of course, tomorrow. And we're going to be hearing House Bill 2164, House Bill 2165, and House Bill 2167. And we had sent out that tomorrow would be the last day to introduce bills It actually is on Thursday. We are having a meeting on Thursday. So if anybody has a bill that they would like to introduce, you can either do it tomorrow or Thursday. It will be the last regular meeting that we'll be accepting bills. So with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.